1943. Washington, D.C. The basement of a nondescript brick building on Nebraska Avenue, far from the marble monuments and grand government facades that define the capital's public face. In a windowless room lit by harsh fluorescent bulbs, dozens of young women sat at wooden tables covered with papers, their fingers moving across typewriter keys with mechanical precision. The air smelled of cigarette smoke, coffee gone cold, and the particular mustiness of a space that never saw daylight. The steady clatter of typewriters created a rhythm like rainfall, punctuated occasionally by the sharper sound of a teletype machine receiving another intercepted message from across the Atlantic. In one corner, a woman named Barbara Eachus stared at a sequence of five-letter groups that made no apparent sense. QWMPL, XNRTG, VHSKA, BDFZ. She had been staring at similar sequences for 6 hours since her shift began at midnight. Her eyes burned. Her back ached. But she did not stop, because somewhere in those meaningless letters was a German submarine's position, and that submarine was hunting an American convoy carrying troops to England. 3 floors above her, in an office with actual windows, a naval intelligence officer named Commander Joseph Wenger was reviewing the daily production figures. Yesterday, American cryptanalysts had successfully decrypted 2,847 German military communications. Today's count was tracking toward 3,100. The numbers had been climbing steadily since February, when new analytical techniques and additional personnel had begun to show results. Wenger allowed himself a brief smile as he made a notation on his report. The Germans still believed their Enigma machine was unbreakable, a technological marvel that had made their military communications invulnerable to Allied intelligence. They were wrong. They had been wrong since 1941, though they would not fully understand the extent of their error until after the war ended. And their wrongness was costing them U-boats, supply convoys, strategic surprise, and ultimately any chance of winning the war. The Enigma machine itself sat in a locked safe in another room of the building, one of several captured specimens that American engineers had studied, until they understood every gear, every rotor, every electrical pathway. It was a beautiful piece of engineering, compact and elegant, resembling a typewriter housed in a wooden box. When an operator pressed a key, electrical current flowed through a complex series of rotors and a plug board, scrambling the letter into something else entirely. Press A and the machine might output Q. Press A again immediately afterward and it might output F, because the rotors advanced with each keystroke, changing the encryption pathway. With 3 rotors selected from a set of 5, each rotor having 26 positions, and a plug board with billions of possible configurations, the Enigma machine offered approximately 150 quintillion possible settings. To German military intelligence, this mathematical complexity represented perfect security. To break Enigma, an enemy would need to test every possible setting, a task that would take longer than the age of the universe using conventional methods. But the Germans had made assumptions, and those assumptions became vulnerabilities that Allied cryptanalysts exploited with a combination of mathematical brilliance, industrial scale, and relentless determination. The story of how Enigma was broken is not a story of a single breakthrough or a lone genius working in isolation. It is a story of systematic industrial intelligence, of thousands of people working in coordinated effort, of machines built specifically to attack other machines, of mathematical insight married to American manufacturing capacity. And it is a story about the profound gap between German confidence and Allied capability, a gap the Germans never fully comprehended until it was far too late to matter. The Enigma machine entered German military service in the late 1920s, adopted by the Wehrmacht, because it offered security that hand ciphers could never match. The machine was portable, relatively simple to operate, and appeared to be mathematically unbreakable. German confidence in Enigma was not mere hubris. It was based on sound cryptographic principles. The machine's rotor system created polyalphabetic substitution on a scale that defeated all traditional cryptanalytic techniques. Frequency analysis, the method that had broken codes for centuries, was useless against Enigma because each letter was encrypted differently every time it appeared. Pattern recognition failed because the encryption changed with every keystroke. Even if an enemy captured an Enigma machine, they would need to know the daily settings, which rotors were installed, their starting positions, and the plugboard configuration, to decrypt messages. And those settings changed every day at midnight, creating a moving target that seemed impossible to hit. What the Germans did not fully appreciate was that perfect security requires perfect implementation, and human beings are incapable of perfection. German radio operators working under battlefield conditions made mistakes. They reused message keys. They sent similar messages on different networks. They began messages with predictable phrases like WTTRBRICHT for weather reports or KEINEBSONDEREIGNISSC for nothing to report. These small human errors created tiny cracks in Enigma's mathematical armor, and Allied cryptanalysts learned to exploit those cracks with ever-increasing sophistication. The British had been working on Enigma since before the war began, operating out of Bletchley Park, a Victorian mansion in the English countryside that became the center of British code-breaking efforts. Polish mathematicians had made the first breakthrough in the 1930s, developing techniques to recover Enigma settings through mathematical analysis. When Poland fell in September 1939, Polish cryptanalysts fled to France and shared their knowledge with British intelligence. The British expanded on Polish techniques, recruiting mathematicians, chess champions, and linguists to staff Bletchley Park. By 1940, they were reading some German Enigma traffic, though not consistently and never in real time. The intelligence they gained, codenamed Ultra, was valuable but limited. The United States entered the code-breaking effort seriously after Pearl Harbor, though American cryptanalysts had been studying German systems since 1940. The U.S. Navy established OP-20G, its Signals Intelligence Division, in a former girls' school in Washington. The Army created its own effort, the Signal Intelligence Service, operating from Arlington Hall, a former junior college in Virginia. Unlike the British, who concentrated their effort at Bletchley Park, the Americans distributed their work across multiple sites, a reflection of American industrial practice that emphasized redundancy and parallel development. The American approach also differed philosophically. Where British cryptanalysts often relied on intuition and brilliant insight, Americans favored systematic methods, mechanical aids, and industrial-scale processing. This difference in approach would prove decisive as the volume of German communications increased throughout the war. The symbolic object that runs through this story, the recurring element that represents American industrial intelligence at its most characteristic, is the IBM punched card. These cards, measuring 7 by 3¼ inches, made of stiff paper stock, each capable of holding 80 columns of data through patterns of rectangular holes, became the foundation of American cryptanalytic success against Enigma. Punched cards were not new technology. Herman Hollerith had invented them in the 1890s for census tabulation, but their application to code-breaking represented a distinctly American innovation. Each intercepted German message could be encoded on punched cards. Each known setting or characteristic of Enigma could be represented as a card. And IBM machines, originally designed for business data processing, could be adapted to sort, compare, and analyze millions of cards, searching for patterns that human analysts would never spot through manual methods. The punched card system worked through sheer scale. When a German radio operator transmitted an Enigma message, Allied listening posts intercepted it. The message was transcribed, assigned an identifier, and converted into punch cards. Multiple cards might represent different aspects of the message: its length, its preamble, its time of transmission, any peculiarities in its structure. These cards were fed into IBM sorting machines that could process hundreds of cards per minute, comparing them against cards representing known Enigma characteristics, looking for matches or anomalies. When the machines found something interesting, human analysts would investigate. Often these investigations led nowhere, but sometimes they revealed a weakness, a pattern, a mistake that could be exploited to recover that day's Enigma settings. By early 1943, the American cryptanalytic effort had achieved industrial scale. OP-20G alone employed over 4,000 people, most of them young women recruited from colleges across the country. They worked in shifts around the clock, maintaining continuous coverage of German communications. The physical infrastructure supporting this effort was staggering. Rooms full of IBM machines clattered day and night, consuming punched cards by the millions. Filing systems held reference material on every German military unit, every radio call sign, every identified operator. Teletype networks connected Washington with listening posts in Maine, Hawaii, California, and ships at sea. The entire operation consumed resources on a scale the Germans never imagined an intelligence effort could require or justify. The British and Americans worked in partnership, sharing intelligence and techniques, though not without friction. British cryptanalysts at Bletchley Park had developed a mechanical device called the bomb, designed to test Enigma settings at high speed by exploiting contradictions in the encryption. The Americans built their own version of the bomb, faster and more reliable, manufactured by National Cash Register in Dayton, Ohio. By 1943, over 100 American bombs were operational, each capable of testing Enigma settings in minutes that would have taken human analysts days or weeks. The bombs worked in conjunction with the punched card systems, creating a two-tier analytical process that combined mechanical brute force with mathematical sophistication. German confidence in Enigma remained absolute throughout this period. German military intelligence, the Abwehr, periodically reviewed Enigma security and consistently concluded that the system was unbreakable. These assessments were based on mathematical analysis that was technically correct but operationally naive. Yes, Enigma offered 150 quintillion possible settings, but German analysts failed to consider that Allied cryptanalysts were not trying to test every possible setting. They were exploiting weaknesses in operational procedures, using captured documents, leveraging operator errors, and applying industrial-scale computing power that German intelligence assumed was impossible or impractical. When occasionally a German officer suggested that perhaps Enigma had been compromised, the suggestion was dismissed as paranoid or defeatist. How could the enemy possibly break such a sophisticated system? What evidence was there of compromise? The absence of obvious security breaches was taken as proof that none existed. This confidence persisted even as evidence accumulated that something was wrong. U-boats operating in the Atlantic reported increasingly frequent encounters with Allied convoys that seemed to know where German submarines would be. German supply convoys were intercepted with suspicious regularity. Allied air attacks struck German positions with uncanny timing, as though the Allies knew German plans in advance. Each incident could be explained individually through bad luck, captured documents, direction finding of radio transmissions, or aerial reconnaissance. But the pattern, viewed collectively, suggested something more systematic. A few German officers, most notably Admiral Karl Dönitz, commander of the U-boat fleet, suspected that Enigma might be compromised. But his concerns were overruled by cryptographic experts who insisted that mathematical analysis proved Enigma's invulnerability. The experts were wrong, but they were convincing, and their authority prevailed. The human cost of this German confidence was measured in sunken submarines, destroyed aircraft, and failed operations. By mid-1943, the Battle of the Atlantic had turned decisively in favor of the Allies, in large part because American and British naval intelligence knew where German U-boats were and could route convoys around them or dispatch hunter-killer groups to destroy them. Ultra-intelligence derived from Enigma decrypts was not the only factor in Allied victory, but it was significant. Historians estimate that Enigma intelligence shortened the Battle of the Atlantic by months or possibly years, saving thousands of merchant ships and tens of thousands of lives. Similar intelligence advantages shaped battles in North Africa, Italy, and eventually the invasion of France. German commanders planned operations assuming their communications were secure, and Allied commanders read those plans and adjusted accordingly. The daily production figures that Commander Wenger reviewed in May 1943, 3,000 messages decrypted per day, represented a watershed moment in the signals intelligence war. This volume meant that American cryptanalysts were reading a substantial portion of total German military communications, not just occasional messages but systematic coverage that provided strategic and tactical intelligence across multiple theaters. The Germans were not entirely blind to Allied intelligence advantages, but they continued to attribute them to everything except the one actual source: compromised communications. This willful blindness, rooted in overconfidence in German technical superiority, represents one of the war's great intelligence failures. The emotional contrast between German expectations and Allied reality was profound. German operators transmitted their Enigma messages with complete confidence, trusting that the mathematical complexity of their machine guaranteed security. They had no way of knowing that within hours, sometimes within minutes, their messages were being read in Washington or London. They could not see the IBM machines sorting punched cards, the bombs testing rotor settings, the thousands of Allied analysts working systematically to strip away Enigma's protection. The psychological impact of this asymmetry was entirely one-sided. Allied forces knew they had an advantage and worked to exploit it. German forces suspected nothing until after the war, when interrogations and captured documents revealed the extent of Allied code-breaking success. The shock was considerable. Officers who had trusted Enigma absolutely discovered that their confidence had been misplaced, that their most secret communications had been read by their enemies, that operational failures attributed to bad luck were actually the result of compromised intelligence. Barbara Eaches, the young woman staring at five-letter groups in that windowless basement room, was one of thousands of Americans who contributed to this intelligence success without fully understanding their role or its significance. She knew she was working on code breaking, but security compartmentalization meant she did not see the complete picture. She processed messages, followed procedures, and trusted that her work mattered even when she could not see immediate results. Years later, after the war ended and ultra-secrecy was partially lifted, she learned that the submarine positions she had helped decrypt had been used to vector destroyer escorts to intercept U-boats, that merchant ships had been saved, that soldiers had reached England safely because of her midnight shifts, staring at nonsense letters until patterns emerged. But in May 1943, she knew only that her eyes hurt and her back ached, and there were more messages waiting to be processed. The transformation that occurred as Allied cryptanalysts mastered Enigma was not just technical but organizational and philosophical. The Americans in particular developed an industrial approach to intelligence that differed fundamentally from traditional espionage or cryptanalysis. Traditional methods relied on brilliant individuals making intuitive leaps. The American approach relied on systems, on breaking complex problems into manageable components, on using machines to amplify human capability, on applying personnel and resources at scales previously unimaginable in intelligence work. This approach reflected American industrial culture, the same culture that produced automobiles by the millions and Liberty ships by the hundreds. If a problem could be solved by systematic application of resources, then apply those resources until the problem yielded. This industrial intelligence extended beyond cryptanalysis to the entire signals intelligence enterprise. American listening posts intercepted tens of thousands of German radio transmissions daily. Traffic analysis tracked which units were communicating with which other units, inferring organizational relationships and operational activity, even from messages that could not be decrypted. Direction-finding networks triangulated transmitter positions, mapping German military dispositions across Europe and the Atlantic. All of this information flowed into analytical centers where it was correlated, indexed, and distributed to commanders who used it to shape operations. The Enigma decrypts were the most valuable intelligence source, but they existed within a larger system that multiplied their effectiveness. By late 1943, American cryptanalytic production had become so routine that the challenge was no longer breaking Enigma, but processing the volume of decrypted messages. 3,000 messages per day meant 90,000 per month, over 1 million per year. Each message needed to be translated from German, analyzed for intelligence value, cross-referenced with previous messages and other intelligence sources, and disseminated to appropriate commanders. The logistics of managing this information flow required organizational innovations as significant as the cryptanalytic techniques that produced the decrypts. Filing systems, index cards, cross-reference databases, and distribution networks all had to be created from scratch and scaled to handle unprecedented volumes. The punched cards that symbolized this effort became more than tools. They became the physical embodiment of American intelligence methodology. Each card represented a piece of information, transformed into a format that machines could process. The cards were not intelligent themselves. They were just paper with holes, but in aggregate, sorted and analyzed by IBM machines, they enabled insights impossible through manual methods. The cards flowed through the system in millions. Cards representing intercepted messages, cards representing Enigma settings, cards representing German military vocabulary, cards representing every piece of information that might help decrypt the next message or understand the last one. The sheer volume of cards required dedicated storage facilities, specialized handling procedures, and continuous maintenance of the machines that processed them. German officers, had they somehow observed American cryptanalytic facilities in 1943, would have been astonished by the scale. This was not a handful of mathematicians working at desks with pencil and paper. This was an industrial operation employing thousands of workers, consuming building space measured in acres, operating equipment that cost millions of dollars. The investment was staggering, but it was justified by results. Every U-boat sunk because of ultra-intelligence saved merchant ships worth far more than the entire American cryptanalytic budget. Every German offensive anticipated and countered saved Allied lives and equipment. The return on investment was impossible to calculate precisely, but it was undoubtedly enormous. The Germans, meanwhile, continued to trust Enigma without any similar investment in verifying that trust. German cryptanalytic efforts focused on Allied codes and achieved some successes, but German intelligence never suspected that their own supposedly unbreakable system had been compromised. This asymmetry, Americans knowing they had broken Enigma while Germans remained confident in its security, gave Allied commanders a priceless advantage. They could read German plans and adjust their own accordingly, while German commanders planned in ignorance of Allied knowledge. The imbalance was not total, the Germans were not blind, and the Allies did not know everything. But the advantage was significant and sustained, maintained from 1941 through the war's end in 1945. The human stories embedded in this technical achievement are worth noting because they reveal the cultural and social dimensions of American intelligence success. The thousands of workers processing Enigma intercepts were predominantly young, predominantly female, and predominantly educated. The military had recognized that codebreaking required aptitude rather than physical strength, and had recruited heavily from colleges and high schools, looking for people with language skills, mathematical ability, or simply sharp minds and attention to detail. These workers, many of them barely out of their teens, formed the foundation of American signals intelligence. They worked long shifts in difficult conditions for modest pay, motivated by patriotism and the knowledge that their work mattered even if they could not discuss it with family or friends. The security surrounding Ultra was extraordinary and maintained successfully throughout the war. Tens of thousands of people worked on signals intelligence, yet German intelligence never learned through espionage or defection that Enigma had been compromised. This security was not accidental but carefully constructed through compartmentalization, vetting, and constant vigilance. Workers knew only what they needed to know for their specific tasks. Distribution of decrypted intelligence was tightly controlled, with elaborate cover stories to disguise the true source. Commanders receiving ultra-intelligence were instructed to take action only if they could plausibly attribute their knowledge to other sources like reconnaissance or captured documents. The discipline required to maintain this security, while exploiting the intelligence, effectively represented an organizational achievement as impressive as the cryptanalysis itself. By 1944, as Allied forces prepared for the invasion of France, Enigma intelligence had become so integral to operations that special procedures were developed to ensure Ultra could support the invasion without revealing its existence. Commanders planning D-Day had access to detailed German order of battle derived from Enigma decrypts. They knew which units defended which sectors, how German reserves were positioned, and how quickly reinforcements could respond to an invasion. This intelligence shaped every aspect of invasion planning, from deception, operations designed to mislead Germans about invasion timing and location, to the selection of landing beaches, where German defenses were weakest. The invasion succeeded for many reasons, but ultra-intelligence was among the most important factors that Allied commanders could not publicly acknowledge. After D-Day, as Allied armies advanced across France and into Germany, Enigma intelligence continued to provide advantage. Allied commanders read German assessments of battle damage, knew when German units were demoralized or undersupplied, anticipated German counterattacks, and exploited gaps in German defenses revealed through decrypted communications. The tactical tempo of Allied operations in 1944 and 1945, the ability to sustain offensive momentum against fierce German resistance, reflected not just material superiority, but information superiority derived from Ultra. German commanders fought skillfully with the information available to them, but they were playing a game where their opponent could see their cards while they could not see their opponents. The outcome was inevitable given such asymmetry. The end of the war brought revelations that shocked German military officers. During interrogations, Allied intelligence officers occasionally revealed that Enigma had been broken, showing captured German commanders transcripts of their own messages. The reaction was typically disbelief followed by horror as the implications became clear. Everything they had considered secure had been read by the enemy. Every plan transmitted by Enigma had been known to Allied commanders. The mathematical certainty that had sustained German confidence in Enigma evaporated in the face of documentary evidence that Allied cryptanalysts had been reading German military communications for years. Some German officers refused to believe it initially, insisting that captured documents or espionage must explain Allied intelligence rather than broken codes. The mathematical complexity of Enigma was supposed to guarantee security. How could mere mathematics overcome mathematics? The answer was that mere mathematics, combined with industrial resources, organizational sophistication, and human insight, could indeed overcome mathematics. The Enigma machine itself was unbreakable in the sense that no single person could sit down with an encrypted message and deduce the plaintext through cleverness alone. But Enigma was not being attacked by a single person. It was being attacked by thousands of people supported by specialized machines, working systematically to exploit weaknesses in procedures rather than weaknesses in the machine itself. The difference between German cryptographic theory and Allied cryptanalytic practice represented a gulf in understanding about how modern technological warfare functioned. The Germans had built a beautiful machine and assumed beauty implied invulnerability. The Allies had treated Enigma as an industrial problem requiring industrial solutions and had deployed resources accordingly. The punched cards that processed millions of data points, the IBM machines that sorted and compared at speeds human analysts could never match, the bombs that tested Enigma settings through mechanical iteration, the organizational structure that coordinated thousands of workers across multiple sites, the security procedures that protected Ultra for 4 years. All of these elements combined to create a system greater than any individual component. German intelligence had nothing comparable because German strategic culture did not conceive of intelligence as an industrial enterprise requiring massive resource investment. German cryptanalysis was skilled and achieved successes against some Allied codes. There is poetry in the contrast between Enigma's mechanical elegance and the industrial brute force that broke it. The Enigma machine was a marvel of compact engineering, a device that fit in a wooden box and offered seemingly perfect security through clever application of electrical circuits and rotating wheels. The system that defeated Enigma sprawled across buildings, employed thousands of people, consumed electricity by the megawatt, and processed information through millions of punched cards. German engineering had created beauty. American engineering had created scale, and in this contest, scale proved decisive. The young woman in the basement processing 5-letter groups at midnight, the IBM machines clattering through punched cards in endless sorting cycles, the bombs testing rotor settings with mechanical persistence, the analysts correlating decrypted messages with other intelligence sources, the translators rendering German military jargon into English, the distribution officers ensuring appropriate commanders received relevant intelligence in time to act. All of these elements, unglamorous and invisible to the public, represented American power at its most characteristic. This was not the power of individual genius or heroic action. This was the power of systematic organization, of resources applied persistently to difficult problems, of institutional capability built through investment and maintained through discipline. When the war ended and secrecy surrounding Ultra gradually lifted, the public learned about code-breaking achievements that had been invisible during the conflict. The story of Enigma entered popular consciousness as a tale of mathematical brilliance and technological espionage. This narrative was not wrong, but it was incomplete. The real story was about industrial intelligence, about how the United States approached signals intelligence with the same methodology it applied to manufacturing aircraft or building ships. Identify the problem, allocate resources, develop systematic procedures, build necessary tools, scale operations to match requirements, and persist until success was achieved. This approach was not as dramatic as stories of lone geniuses making brilliant intuitive leaps, but it was more accurate and more revealing about the sources of Allied victory. German generals believed Enigma was unbreakable until they learned otherwise after the war. Their belief was reasonable based on cryptographic theory, but disastrously wrong in practice. They trusted mathematics without understanding that mathematics could be opposed by organization, that complexity could be overcome by scale, that perfect security in theory meant nothing if implementation was flawed, and adversaries were willing to invest unlimited resources in exploitation. The 3,000 messages Americans decrypted daily by mid-1943 represented not just cryptanalytic success, but a fundamental difference in how the two sides approached the technological challenges of modern warfare. Germans built sophisticated systems and assumed sophistication guaranteed effectiveness. Americans built systems designed for industrial-scale operation and sustained them through resource commitment that Germans found incomprehensible. In the end, Enigma's breaking was not about the failure of German engineering or German intelligence. The Enigma machine was well designed, and the Germans used it competently. Enigma's breaking was about the success of Allied industrial intelligence, about the transformation of cryptanalysis from an artisanal craft into an industrial process, about the application of American organizational capability to a problem Germans assumed was insoluble. The punched cards that flowed through IBM machines in Washington represented this transformation in physical form. They were pieces of American industrial power, as significant in their way as Liberty ships or Sherman tanks, proof that wars are won not just on battlefields, but in the unglamorous spaces where information is transformed into intelligence and intelligence into action. The basement where Barbara Eaches processed messages, the rooms full of machines processing punched cards, the organizational charts showing thousands of workers deployed across signals intelligence functions, the procedures manuals specifying how to handle every aspect of Enigma decryption. These were the true symbols of Allied victory in the intelligence war. They represented capacity the Germans never matched, investment the Germans never made, commitment to systematic methodology that German strategic culture never fully embraced. And because of this advantage, invisible to the public and largely unrecognized even by many military commanders, Allied forces fought the war with knowledge their enemies lacked, anticipating movements their enemies thought secret, exploiting weaknesses their enemies did not know were visible. Today, the IBM punched cards that broke Enigma are museum pieces, relics of a technological era long past, but they remain symbols of a truth about power that transcends their specific application. That systematic organization and resource commitment can overcome apparently insurmountable technical challenges. That scale deployed persistently is its own form of brilliance, and that wars are won by nations that understand how to transform industrial capacity into military advantage across every dimension of conflict, including dimensions their enemies never recognize as battlefields at all.